Hello, welcome. This is going to be a Path of Exile 1 Phrecia 2.0 build guide for what I would call the tankiest build of the league, if not one of the tankiest. Up here on Path of Exile Ninja, if we go to builds, current league, and sort by EHP, I'm currently at the top, playing a Transcendence Scavenger. There is a bug abuser above me. If this is a real build that functions in maps, then I apologize, but for the sake of the video, I'm at the top playing a Transcendence Scavenger, Replica Dreamfeather is an armor stacking setup, armor stacking, aura stacking. But as you can see, the overall cost of the build is generally low. Not many corrupted implicits on these uniques, using lots of them. No Mageblood. As you can probably guess, if we compare to others around this EHP, they're all Mageblood setups. This one is much more budget. And when we go into the POB, we will talk about the items more. But overall, very default, low amount of awakened gems, really just one, the awakened lightning pen support. And yeah, let's get into the POB. Okay, so we are in the POB here. This is the most recent import of my character of the league. I'm level 96, about to be 97, and as you can see, the HP is extremely high, 1.3 million, with extremely large max hits, physical being our biggest, as Transcendence, the bread and butter of this build, allows for extremely favorable physical damage reduction, specifically physical damage from hits. Currently at 89 all res and around 18 million damage. I would say 18 million is more than enough in combination with this level of survivability to really take on anything in the league. Extremely juiced maps with all the best idols, or Wave 15 Simulacrum, Valdo's maps. I would say this is not enough for ghosted, feared Valdo's maps. I would not enter a voided map with this character, and I would not feel comfortable probably doing an ultimatum or a map with a timer without a Mageblood, as the single target damage without flask effect up can be kind of lacking, and outside of a Union of Souls situation, I would think it might be difficult to sustain flask charges through that. But let's go into the gear. As I just mentioned and mentioned before, we do not have Mageblood. We are using this Micro Distillery Belt with Alchemist Genius. This could be a little better. This could have increased flask effects, Unveil, and potentially third res at the bottom, or max energy shield, something like that. But for purposes of this build up to this point, totally fine. Uh, Using a tincture, overpowering, as we do have passives and radiance of Imbalanced Guard can be allocated without connection to the tree, and we are taking gain 1 rage on melee hit here. If you don't have that, you definitely want to use a rage on melee hit tincture. Flasks are very standard setup for armor stacker, aura stacker, just additional resists, evasion, increased armor, and reduced effective curses suffix. This can be reduced effects of almost whatever you need, or stun immunity. Tattooing stun immunity is another option. On dex nodes, however, that is a little difficult without Mageblood. Another thing the no Mageblood setup goes into differently than the perfect gear setup, which I'll show later, is the rings. You will need strength. It is a little awkward to get that without it on the implicit of a Mageblood here, but making up for it on the ring slots is not too bad. These are generally pretty easy to make. Unveiling max mana and reduced mana cost of skills can be a little annoying, but if you start with a fractured base like this, pretty easy and relatively cheap. The build, of course, runs a lot of uniques, as you see. Replica Dreamfeather, Armor Stacker, Aura Stacker Staple allows us to convert our max armor into direct damage through 1% increase attack damage per 450 armor. We are using Dawnbreaker, which in conjunction with Transcendence and other nodes we take allows for 100% of physical damage taken to be converted to elemental damage. Formless Flame, ideally with +2 level of socketed AoE gems. This is just fire. Lightning Coil, ideally with +1 maximum all res, corrupted implicit. Soul Ascension, and Ralakesh Boots with max endurance charges, as well as the Eternal Struggle for increased aura effects and increased global defenses. If you have this, this is pretty important that you have a higher roll on the Searing Exarch implicit, that being the increased aura effect. Roll for like this, for example, actually will not activate the call, as this increased attack damage implicit is a higher magnitude than the Searing Exarch implicit. However, I was just doing some group play and already had some call and wanted more damage from this increased attack damage implicit. The graphs, +2 max fire resistance. Heart of Flame actually is completely useless here. +2 maximum fire resistance is just extremely expensive on any graph that is not a Heart of Flame base. Heart of Flame is useless because when we go into the skills, we are using Molten Shell, Vol Molten Shell, which generally causes Heart of Flame not to trigger when we're already using Molten Shell on cast damage taken. And the second graph is extremely important, however. Wreathed in Light, giving us lucky damage, is absolutely mandatory for any lightning damage build. Lightning damage generally has the highest range of potential floor damage to ceiling damage, and giving us lucky damage is essentially just like giving us double damage. The talent essentially says 50% chance to deal double damage. And damage penetrates 6% lightning resist, not too bad either. Overall, the build does struggle with lightning penetration, especially if you do not have a very expensive Watcher's Eye jewel, one with gain energy shield per enemy hit while affected by discipline, as well as penetration while affected by wrath. The energy shield per enemy hit is absolutely mandatory, is a core aspect of the build's survivability. You cannot play without that, in my opinion. However, you can play without the % wrath penetration, as that's merely a damage increase, nice to have, however not absolutely core. Soul Ascension Cardinal Mitts, I believe, are absolutely core to the build. It is kind of something that ramps up in maps. You will feel a little slow in the first pack, and these gloves are absolutely a massive damage scaler. I would not recommend trying to find a way to build around them. I would recommend just making sure that you are able to obtain these before you swap. Going into the cluster jewel setup, small clusters with % mana reservation efficiency are, of course, the core staple of any armor stacker build or stacker build, is combination with introspection, providing us 10% increased aura effect. These can be quite expensive. I do not have good jewels, nor do you require them. However, they are kind of the end game damage scaler of the build outside of Mageblood. 35 effects, introspection with % max or % fire resistance, and all attributes are the pinnacle and are what I use in the perfect item Pob, which I'll have linked in description, as well as this one. But as you can see, I have some 25 effects, some without. I even have a cluster up here just without introspection at all, as at this level in the build, I found I needed 3 mana reservation efficiency nodes instead of an introspection. Overall pathing, very standard again for armor stacker or stackers, just pathing to every single cluster we can reasonably, getting a lot of these jewel sockets. The build heavily relies on jewels overall and heavily relies on the smalls overall. We are using Militant Faith. This is an extremely good roll. There is an even better roll, I would say. 1% increase effect of non-curse, as well as 1% reduced mana cost of skills per 10 Devo, is, I would say, the true best one and what I use in the perfect gear. However, you really only need the 1% increase effect of non-curse auras, and this roll actually with 3% increased defenses is technically more damage. It does scale your base armor quite a bit higher and leads to the armor multiplier after so many more multipliers that we have being quite a bit higher. But when you have Mageblood, is kind of when you'd probably be able to afford the perfect jewel anyway, and by then I would just go for that, as you definitely don't need the damage at that point. Endurance charges as well. Next level I will go for this max endurance charge here. Ideally, I think playing with 4 is totally fine. This is not a mass AoE mapper. You'll see in some gameplay that I'll have running throughout the video. A lot of it will be from a duo farm I was doing, as I've definitely felt with Phrecia League that group play is completely broken compared to solo play with the drops you get. Just the overall quality of the ground loot is much, much higher and scales much better with party play. But this build is totally fine for either solo or party. Okay, let's get into the skills. We are running both Vol Smite and Smite as is standard for most Smite builds. If you're not aware, Vol Smite Aura makes Smite Strike +1 target with Lightning. It's essentially a mini +1 non-Vol strike. Grace, Purity of Fire, Determination, Vol Molten Shell, Vol Haste, Wrath, Discipline, Purity of Elements. In the current level of gear, we do not have Haste on permanently. To have haste on permanently would require at least one level 4 Enlighten, as well as level 99 in my opinion, as that's is when you'd be able to click enough small cluster nodes to actually get them in a reservation. But having just the Vol Haste for burst is really quite comparable. I don't notice a lack of damage, a lack of movement speed. Build already moves very quickly, as we are using Adrenaline in the Ascendancy. Now, aura effects, of course, #1 scalar of our damage. It's quite important that at least your Grace, Purity of Fire, and Determination are level 21. As for Wrath, Discipline, Purity of Elements, it is really nice to have, of course. It will be direct damage increase, direct survivability increase, and a slight small damage increase as we do scale overcapped fire resistance into more armor, which is more damage. But really focus on getting Grace, Purity, and Determination at level 21, as these are the main auras that scale your damage and survivability. Purity of Fire versus level 21 versus level 20 is a 2% maximum resistance increase, as you have so much introspection that the 1% from going up in level here becomes 2. Smite linked with Awakened Lightning Penetration, very important that you have a way to inflict lightning exposure, massive damage increase, ideally Awakened elemental damage with attacks to get Ellie Reflect Immune. Inspiration, as your base mana pool is quite low and you do not want to have that kind of flickering of your spell where sometimes it's not going off, that's just a massive damage loss. So this helps with mana cost tremendously. Volatility, and ideally Awaken Multi-Strike, as that would be a massive damage ramp, but totally fine with just normal Multi-Strike. Ball Molten Shell on a cast when damage taken link, as long with Cold Snap for Frenzy Charge generation. It's very important that you leave this cast when damage taken level 1 and leave the Vol Molten Shell at level 7, as any higher level Vol Molten Shell will not be able to be triggered by the cast when damage taken. It's very important that you leave the Cold Snap at level 1, as the only thing we use it for is Frenzy Charge generation, and it will only cause your spells to potentially kind of flicker and you to be at low mana if you level this up. Only movement skill we have in the build right now is Leap Slam. Not ideal, I would say, but just very difficult to add anything else to this. Kind of every link is already full. Leap Slam, really just what I went for here. You can choose Shield Charge or Frost Blink if you want, but if there's one thing that you're going to be spamming, I do like to have something that kind of can go over terrain and doesn't have an internal cooldown. So I went for Leap Slam here. Okay, now briefly going into the perfect Gear Pob. Few differences, obviously. Damage is much higher, health pool is essentially doubled, and our armor is essentially doubled, as well as we have 90 all res. But we are running Molten Strike in this setup. It just does scale better at this point in the game. Smite is totally viable as well, using this link setup as well. You'd swap off the Nimbus for a Ring of Kalandra, or Kalandra's Touch rather, and mirror this ring. We, of course, have Mageblood with Strength implicit. I do believe it is harder to get Strength elsewhere than it is to just run Strength implicit, not run Grace or Determ Aura effect. But if you happen to have a double implicit Determ Grace Aura effect, then you probably could make more damage scale elsewhere with some tuning. We are running Perfect Jewels in this. Introspection, 35 effects, Fire Strength, Storm Drinker, Widespread, Introspection, all Ellie. Basically every single one of them is 35 effects. There's almost no way to change anything here. This does require nearly a 1-to-1 mirrored setup. If you don't have these cluster jewels, these small cluster jewels with this exact kind of stat weight, you will struggle. But you obviously can kind of, if you need to get strength on one and drop attributes on another, pick it up elsewhere, obviously make adjustments like that. This does use a Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo similar to the last one. We are still allocating champion. 15% plus Fortify is just extremely strong, and overall the pathing is mostly unchanged. Sniper's Mark instead of Conductivity generally will scale higher. We do have Haste on permanently in this setup, and everything else is very much the same. You also can find a way to fit Vitality in here. If you're willing to probably lose around 2 million damage, you can have a level 10 Vitality on, giving you some nice regen. But I found in Phrecia League specifically, running this many risk scarabs and sometimes adding more, it's very likely you will roll into no regen. So Vitality has kind of lost all of its helpfulness there.